Thanks everybody's attention. We can get started. It's a little bit after 9:30. Welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee for November the 16th. We'll call the meeting to order, please. Mr. Member, is there any late items?
There are no late items to the agenda.
Motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Kevin, seconded by Bill. Call the question, all in favor. Thank you. Adoption of the minutes from November the 1st, 2016. Mover.
So moved.
Mover by Bill, seconded by Jim. Any additions, deletions? There being none, call the question, all in favor. Opposed, carried, thank you. I'll turn it over to Mr. Mema for the administration. A, user rate increase bylaws. I'll just indicate the purpose is to provide background on the bylaws to amend water, sewer, and garbage rates for 2017.
Thank you. These are a follow-up to the discussion that we had at the last meeting about our user rates. And so we did provide you with the background. So we are following up here with the report asking that the committee recommend to council to adopt these three bylaws, being the sewer regulation and charges amendment bylaw 2016, the water works rate regulation amendment bylaw, and the municipal solid waste solid collection amendment bylaws. These would, after your blessing, proceed to the council meeting. Thank you.
It's council's pleasure. Would you wish to make a motion on the recommendation and then discuss individually? Or not?
Move recommendation number one. The Finance and Audit Committee recommends once you receive the report pertaining to.
Are you making reference to two and that being A?
All of them.
Or all of them? All of them.
All two.
Second?
Second.
Second by Jerry. Any discussion? Councilor Good. Over to you.
I found over time people have always asked me, and it's dealt. Typically, this is an immensely intense project, the finance, and we always have to look for better ways to explain it to the public. And I think that's the thing. And I've appreciated the reports we've had over the last while. They're fairly clear and crisp and that. But again, we have to have that factual information built in all the reports, and I appreciate it. So it's better. Thank you.
Jerry?
Thank you. Sewer 5% increase. Is that taking into account right now the secondary treatment plant, or not? Or is that going to go up substantially in the following years? But don't we still have to pay for that?
It comes through the requisition process. So this is purely for our own sewer system.
Thank you.
Bill?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I think, such as I work at RDN, I think we increase user fees quite. I don't know if we've aggressively looked at any alternatives or how monies we can not do this. So, have we exhausted every ways and means to not do this, these increases? Just putting that out there. I know it's an easy question to put out there, but I just want to get comfortable with this, like the pattern of councils in the past and the RDN's pattern of this. Let's just increase. Basically, it's just a form of taxation. So I'm having a hard time with this. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Was there a question in there, Bill? Did you want to?
Sure. I'll ask. Yeah, the question: do we exhaust other ways where we don't have to do this?
All right. So I'll let Deborah address how we got to the increases. I think they're pretty minimal and specific to.
So with sewer and water, the increases are solely for increase or contributions to the asset management reserve and for the long-term water supply plan. So the 7.5%, 5% of that has been in place since, Bill's not here, I think about 2008, and it was for the 25-year long-term water supply plan. The additional 2.5% on that is for increased contributions to the water asset management reserve, which will be for supply distribution. The 5% annual increase for user fees for sewer is completely for increased number of contributions to the sewer asset management reserve. So these increases are solely for renewal or development of new infrastructure for sewer and water services. So just a caution with the solid waste collection lines, it's still based on manual collection on our current service level. And that once council makes a decision about automation, it will change, and we'll let you know that.
Thank you. And just before I go to bed, thanks for that response. I wasn't as concerned with water and sewer as I was about the garbage, recognizing that we are going into a new system soon, and what that new system change looks like in relation to this $2 increase that is proposed for 2017.
So to comment to that, the report is going to come to you shortly on the garbage side of things. What we're doing here is an administrative process which is time sensitive. So depending on how you decide on how you proceed on the automation side of it, we will have to come back and make an amendment. But there's a report coming shortly, and that will address what the increases will be like. And at that point, whichever way you vote, if we need to make an amendment to this bylaw, we'll make that.
I have Brad and then Jim and then Jerry.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. That was going to be my comment. Is the automated collection service report is coming for November 28th for council decision. So documents and attachments will be provided shortly, and that is correct. We had to base it on what we have, not what we're projecting to have, as we don't know what council's going to do. So once we have direction from council, that will amend the budget accordingly.
Jim, Jerry.
Well, for many years, these percentages outstrip any cost of living indexes and all those. I know they're hard to apply to it. And I guess that's the sustainability question. We have that new person coming in, Mrs. Fowler. I think it is Ms. Fowler, however, to look at the sustainability. But this is continuing to grow and grow and grow. And when we separate out, I mean, our RDN goes up $1 million this year in the requisition, from 17.1 to 18.1 in a year. So that's a requisition up there for all the things we pay for out there. Plus our costs here are going up 5% at a time, and the costs out there are going up 5% on people. And so how do we, what are the plans for that? How are other parts of the world, like Germany, for example, where they don't have a lot of water sources and they do a lot of that? How are they doing? Are they, because from what I understand, the taxation system is different, of course. It's hard to go outside the world, but is every community facing this right now, where these costs are outstripping? And then don't forget, the $100 million was put upon us without choice from an upper level bureaucracy, the Vancouver Health Authority. Or they said we had the filter, and we chose a really nice filtration plant, and we chose some form of Cadillac or whatever, and we never fought to say our water supply is really good. So that concerns me. That are we representing this tax 5%, or am I representing the ability for people to afford their taxes and clean water and sewer and garbage, the basic things? In the core services review, I know our documentation has been poor or lacking sometimes, and that's getting far better. But how come? It's always 5, 7, 5. It's been for years now. And where is that clearly for me in a couple sheets of paper where I can see that growth? Because that's tough for me too, to arrive at the table and see these and have them in my agenda for a few days. Can someone answer me, or is that just a nebulous question? The 5% growth.
Well, I'll defer to the experts.
We will try to answer. I'll talk about the future. She will talk about the past. The future is we are currently preparing to go through a comprehensive user fee review process, which is going to address our historical growth, our strategy for the future, and for water, take into account the fact that we have a successful conservation program and what that means for funding that process. And so we did have a conference call yesterday just talking exactly about what do others do. And so that is going to come in front of you at some point, I think in January, February, talking about what do others do. I think Deborah has addressed that there is a strategy that in place for a couple of years, which speaks to the 5% and the other one. As of now, we can pull out a chart that will show you how it's grown, but that's what it's going to be. I think we will have a wholesome discussion when we get into that user fee review process. At that point, we have comparisons to look at and see what others do as well.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Or sorry, with
Brad,
Sure.
No, well,
I think you can answer. I thought you were going to answer Jim's question.
It was just a comment towards asset management and the general struggle that we're having about the costing itself, which is, the province has done a couple of things. First of all, they've attached all the asset management and understand it before we qualify for grants or monies or what have you, so we're stuck with that. And also the municipalities themselves for generations have not done a great job at actually understanding what infrastructure we have, because the old way of going was, well, if it died, then the province would just give us a shiny new Eiffel Tower, and that's not the way we do business anymore. So unfortunately, we're behind the eight ball as municipalities for being able to properly assess our infrastructure, which is increasing those costs as more and more information we find out about it.
Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you. Just two questions. 220 gallons per day. How is that compared to the previous years? Have we leveled off? Are we still dropping in because we're still saving water? Or how's that number coming?
We use that as a basis for
Yeah.
comparison, and we keep that across, so we can give you a number of what the changes are going to look like. If you're looking at the operational changes, we are the least qualified to answer that. We probably need the
Bill
BLC's,
Yeah, because I'd like to know how that's trending when we talk about trend, because are we now being more conservative with water? Now next year is going to be 210, or are we going to start spiking up? Because I like to know where that trend is going. We can have this discussion. And then the other thing is, I don't mind people paying for what they use. In the form of garbage, we're increasing it by $2. What's our income on the tags? How much do we generate from selling tags per year?
It's about, I'd say 25, 30,000, I'd have to look at that.
Like, is there any way that we can in-charge it? I know we from 2 to 3, but can we go from 3 to 4 and charge those people that need that extra garbage, either there's illegal secondary suites or whatever they have, to charge them more for an extra service that we are providing above and beyond what we've provided all the residents, to be fair? Like, I don't think it's fair to a senior that has a house that uses half a garbage can compared to somebody else that is filling it up more, and then they end up getting another garbage can on top of that for extra $2 or $3 it is now. So I think that when they're putting more than what they're supposed to, I think we should charge them more. It's a premium, a service that we've come to the conclusion that it's fair to everybody in the NIMO, and you're using above and beyond, so you should be paid a premium. I think $2, $3 is a good deal, a really good deal for an extra garbage can. So I think that we should be looking at that number and go to 4 if we're going to look at these user rates and fees. But I know that we're going to switch to automation and this stuff, so I guess that's going to be a discussion of how automation goes. But that was a concern I had.
I think you make a really good point. Wendy and then Brad, unless Brad wanted to respond to Jerry.
Just a response to Councilor. The one thing that I caution council with this is, from a bylaw enforcement perspective, we're already seeing a lot of illegal dumping as it exists right now, and part of that is due to costs. Residents are able to get their garbage to secluded areas, so clearly it's not transportation. So if we start changing costs, the thing we're going to have to say is, what's the threshold before people decide not to buy those tickets anymore, and they just start dumping garbage to the rates that we're already seeing. So that would have to be something that would have to be incurred in something, that discussion.
Well, I think you brought something up that's also a huge issue. I agree with Jared. I think that if people are not keeping their garbage down, then, I mean, I don't know whether, depending on the number of people you have in your household or something, that might change how we look at it. But this idea that we won't increase because then that's just going to give an incentive to somebody to dump their garbage elsewhere, I think we need to address that issue as well. And whether or not we're doing a good job of that, I'm not sure at the present time. That's a whole other subject that needs to be looked at probably. Because that's a serious offense in my opinion. To dump your garbage just wherever you darn well feel like it, rather than paying to take it to the dump or paying for an extra garbage can. And we perhaps need to do some more education around that. I know there's, it's interesting because I don't pay attention if there is a lot of education because I don't do it. But, and of course people who do it probably don't pay any attention to the education because they don't care. So it is a huge problem and it's something that the city needs to address. My original question though was around our capital reserve for infrastructure. There is a plan in place every year to expend some of that money and do, our passageway to my house on Wall Street was cut off for the last 7 weeks. I'm assuming that's part of infrastructure upgrading. So is there a way to, this may be a very stupid question, is there a way to speed this up, expand that? Because the price of this stuff is going up at a pretty fast rate of speed. I mean, every time we put something off for a period of time, it costs more money. So are we doing that to our full capacity? I guess that's one of the questions I would ask.
So through the chair, I think we will, when we get to the capital side, I think we will address that piece. You're right, it's always a capacity issue, whether it's contractors, whether it's financial, and how much inconvenience do you place on the residents once you dig up the whole town. So you kind of have to balance that. But I think our engineers can speak to that once we get to that conversation, and it's going to happen today.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. I just have a couple of, just a question. The 220 gallons per day, was that, how did we arrive at that number? What made 220 the magic number?
Through the chair, that number was calculated just over a year and a half ago. We looked at the average family for a household family and came up to 219 gallons per day was an average usage for the homes in single family home.
My second question is in relation to the illegal dumping in terms of bylaw enforcement or compliance or whatever. So if we acknowledge that there's a considerable amount of dumping taking place illegally, do we track or do we go through a couple of the bags and go, oh, there's a piece of mail, oh, there's a whole bunch of pieces of mail, and then determine from there whether or not we might be able to identify the perpetrators, so to speak?
Through the chair, I've just taken over bylaw services 2 days ago, so it's part of the things I'm looking at for revamping. So I will get that question answered pretty shortly.
Thank you. And then just a comment is, when we deal with these things in isolation as we do, because everything kind of is in isolation, we don't think about the RDN and we don't think about other things. So we look at this and go, oh, it's only $3.50 a month for all of these things. But when we do them in isolation, they seem very minuscule. When we add everything up, it does start to add up. So this is a comment. Did anybody else wish to speak before we vote?
Staff can clarify this for me if you can, but our sewer rates are based on our water rates because we don't have sewer meters. Am I correct? So how do we base our water? Is it based on water use? How do we get our sewer rate? How do you know how much sewer goes through my house? If I have a big garden, for example, and my water's not going into my sewer, we're actually recharging the water system around my house. Am I getting charged a sewer rate on an average? How does that, because it used to be calculated on water rate, now what is it?
Through the chair to Councillor Kidd. The sewer charges are currently a flat rate charge per day. It's not based on consumption. We are actually looking into charging sewer based on an average consumption of the house, it'd be a percentage of the water consumption to reflect the amount that's actually going down the place. But currently, we are charging a flat rate per day, so it's not based on consumption.
It used to be.
I'm not aware of that.
It used to be,
Yeah.
then it came to a flat rate.
I'm
Butler Taylor brought that up years ago.
I'm actually not aware of when or if the sewer rates changed, or if they were previously based on consumption. I don't believe they were ever based on consumption, just in conversations I've had with my staff.
I'm wrong lots, don't get me wrong.
I could certainly clarify that point.
So, yeah, so on the other side, with the low use, yeah, I mean, I think that means gray water, black water separation. We don't have to treat water coming from 22 miles away, send it down the coastline over to there and treat it again. By separating, we would save on them. We would have permanent groundwater charging if we separated that water out. It would be better for our groundwater, better for our sewer systems, everything. And it would talk a lot about cost coming down because the treatment centers could last infrastructure a lot longer by treating less materials. So as far as the dumping, RDN does some stats on it. I don't think we rip up that many bags and that, but it's 2 or 3 spots. The one up where the College Park was, they used to dump there like crazy, and around a few of the parks. And that is, I think all the kids in school are getting educated well on that. I believe it's really stupid to do it. And so from my perspective, I'm more concerned with 75% of our households in that study we used a long time ago had no kids under 15. And that's more of a concern to me of what's going to happen to our garbage and water systems and rates. If you have less people using it, less kids running showers and stuff, people are going to have to pay more to keep that system in its order. So that's a concern to me. Thank you.
I'm too old to have kids.
Tim, can I ask?
Sure. And if we can just go around the horn here one more time, so that, and then we'll vote.
I just wanted to ask Councilor Tripp what report or study we're talking about. on that.
Well, there was a, I don't know who did it, we say 300 households in Nanaimo, and many people have quoted that study over time. And they talked about it, and it has one point, I'll dig it up.
Okay.
And it was
Thanks.
75% of the households, it was only a 300-person study.
Yeah.
It's not hugely valid, but it was a study that we've used, and people have talked about it on the table. I'll dig it up.
Okay.
Just a side note about the illegal dumping. The Youth Advisory Council is forming 4 dates to clean up 4 sites around Nanaimo, around each high school. Illegal dumping, clean up.
Anybody else, any comments?
I just wanted to, good. As far as the garbage is concerned, I don't know what happens in our house. So we've got 3 people living there, and I don't know whether we get all kinds of packaged goods in there or what the story is, but I regularly have 2 cans. Lots of times I have 3. And my biggest concern about garbage is looking forward. When we go to automation, contamination and the recycling. That's going to be impossible to, or it's going to be really, really difficult. They're going to have cameras in the trucks to be able to see it. But right now we're at a 7% contamination rate, and it's going to get worse because people clear education. With the styrofoam in there, it's a contaminant. And what's in addition to which we've got the haulers saying that when they arrive down at the landfill, they could have a $1,500 load that all of a sudden, based on fine, becomes a $4,500 load. So contamination is one of the biggest challenges we face. When I look at the $3, $4, I voted against the increase to $3 because it represented a 50% increase overnight. Going to $4, you're starting to get a tipping point where you're going to force the people, or the people will make the conscious decision that they're going to take their garbage, throw it in their car, and run it down the landfill because they can do it for a $6 minimum. Next thing you know, you got lineups, a block long to line up for the scale on a Saturday, and we know that that's just going to add at the RDN level additional costs. As far as the water treatment plant is concerned, I always commented about how dirty the water was in Nanaimo. And when I say dirty, I'm talking about when you've got your pitcher that you water your plants with, and within a couple of weeks after cleaning it, it's got a muddy scum on it. We've got a small reservoir with a very fast refill rate, recharge rate, but it's also contaminates very quickly too. So, as I understand it, we used to have on average a 6 to 10 NTU reading every day in Nanaimo. That was average. There were days on heavy flow when you had turbidity. It was up to 60 on a regular basis. And the requirements are 1 NTU, 1. And our plant gets it down to 0.01. And it wasn't mandated by Island Health, it was mandated by the federal government, who passed it down to the province, and Island Health are simply the administrators of the regulations. But I accept that. I didn't say that to get in an argument with you, Jim.
You know me well, eh?
I didn't say that for that.
No, yeah.
I accept the facts as they are.
The drinking water standards brought it down to 1 NTU. We really never, on the 5 NTUs, we only had, I think, over 10 or 15 years, 2 sessions. What it was over a 24-hour period. If it met that turbidity level, then we would have to boil our water. We never met that. But then when the Canadian drinking water standards post-Walkerton and the lying and cheating that went on in Walkerton that screwed up their water system, we have all had to change our water systems. So this is based on a lot of stuff along the lines. They say, and VHA is just handing it down to us. Well, that's a problematic for me sometimes when we get handed down a lot of stuff that we don't own and we shouldn't be paying the costs of, and we're involved in a whole bunch of issues that I still don't see mandatory discretionary work separated. And so that still makes it hard for me. And this is important. Water is our most important thing. Absolutely most important product. We have no development with it. We have no people without it. We will never grow without water. And if we don't do our water system right and correct, we're in big trouble. Thank you. Well, there's my answer.
Call the question. All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. 5B, provide background. This is the bulk water rates for Southwest Extension. Provide background on the bylaw to amend water rates for Southwest Extension for 2017. Mr. Newell, could you just introduce the recommendation?
Thank you. I'll defer to Ms. Hiscock.
To Chair, the recommendation is that the Finance and Audit Committee recommend that Council receive the report pertaining to Southwest Bulk Water Rate Amendment Bylaw 2016 number 7099.05.
Council's pleasure. Would you like to move the recommendation?
I move staff recommendation.
By Jerry, seconded by Bill. Discussion. Councilor Kerr.
What protection do we have in these rates in our water system to stop Nestle from coming in and buying 200 million liters for $2? That's a big topic across BC currently, where major corporations see us as we're doing that, we're building their product. The industry demand is there. We put government money into it. The industry demand is there. We create it through education, and we build the product for it at a rate that they can extract sometimes beyond what the communities can stop them for in few cases. What do we have? This is water, actually bulk water. And we have a few connections. We have our emergency connection at Lanceville, and we have the standpipe that was put in out at Ocean View, which would be in our land, but that one's outside of our area. How do these rates affect if Lanceville was to get their water is my second question. So 2 questions.
So, through the chair, those are pretty difficult ones for us to answer. They will need real science obviously to that. So we'll take those away through the CO, and we can probably respond to that.
If Nestle's wanted to get water in the Nanaimo area, would they not have to go to the province and apply for a water license?
I think that's my concern too, is that there's again somebody else having the ability to overwhelm us Like, they can issue that. Just so, and I hate to say that the political stuff involved, but it absolutely can be political, and they have the ability to do that and issue a license. Well, like the watershed in South Island, where there's a mining operation and a recycling of hazardous material soils above a watershed, and this goes on. And our island's huge, and we're pushing it right into a developed area. And those governments, what they think are superior to me, are in our way to stop what we need for our people in our area and our neighbors. And that's the concern, because that's why I asked that question. Is this, sometimes I feel powerless sitting here that we just have to accept stuff.
But if I read this, are you?
Yeah, the issue of, so for example, it's my understanding that the rates for water on a bulk rate like that, with a water license, are based on the same as everyone else would be using. So if you've got a pulp mill that uses water, they'll pay the same rate as Essence.
It's not so in the Nanaimo. I think they get a lesser rate than us for 5-year guarantee. I think so. I can confirm that.
Great.
They get
But
less than
if Nestle's wanted to, they could apply to the province to draw off of the reserve that Harmac uses. I believe that's,
and they have to make it potable, but
yeah.
it was not through the potable.
Right.
So there's money in that. When you buy for $2 a million and you sell for $3 a liter, there's money in it. Big. in it.
Thank you. So, any other comments or questions?
Through the chair again to Councillor Kemp, the current bylaw that we're looking at, that's 268 for 1,000 gallons, that's specific to Southwest Extension water. And the bulk rate that's in our regular water rate bylaw is $7.28 for 1,000 gallons. That includes distribution costs. There's a specific arrangement for Southwest that.
Because the water line came through extension, and they got the deal to get water.
Yeah, cost of water only.
And they're supposed to be on that committee. The committee that never matched.
Any other, Jerry?
Thank you. The increase of 41 cents to meet full recovery costs, does that include what we put into reserves for upgrade infrastructure, upgrade required? Or is this just to meet? Okay, so this 41 cents is a 7.5% increase? Because that's what Nanaimo is. So my question is, if we're paying 7.5% increase, would they be paying 7.5% increase? Because that seems logical.
It's a blend of operating and that transfer reserves, like, I have to look at it, but it's definitely the investment for renewal as well as the annual operating and maintenance that they participate in, that's allocated to them.
Okay, I just want to make
Based
sure.
on their consumption.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it is not less than 7.5. If our residents are paying more and they're getting it cheaper, that's just the service that we have for our residents. So I would like to make sure that the number is at least 7.5% increase. If that makes sense.
I believe it was 18 actually.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're not doing a disservice for our residents.
I get your point. Another, if I may, question I have. The total cost to buy water in Southwest Extension is estimated to be $9,076,507. What data or metrics or analysis was utilized to arrive at $9,076,000? And I think that this might be contained in a question from Jerry and a comment from Jim. And how did we arrive at $9 million? Does it include all of our capital improvements? Does it include all of our moving forwards? Does it include, how did we arrive at $9 million for the year of 2017?
So there's a detailed calculation. It's based specifically on our budgets, so our annual operating budget as well as that contribution to the reserves. And I can pull it up if you want. It's a lot of numbers, but it's based on our budget.
This is the way for us to move it than 41 cents is to have a higher rate that it costs for us to provide, because we can't go above that.
Yeah.
We can't go above what it costs. in our estimate by law, I guess. So, just to make sure that we got it as high as it can possibly be, so our recovery is as high as it can possibly be. And then my comment to follow that would be, if we were ever to engage in a landfill equation, would this be the same application process in landfill? To provide water to the landfill expansion?
I'm conflicted out, I can't.
Well, that's
so,
what we-
yeah.
No, you're ours now. What do you mean you're conflicted out?
I'm conflicted.
Shut the door.
Speak on
Hold the
it.
door, Paul.
All right, so what would happen in is this the same application?
I'm conflicted.
So, from a principle, it will be the same. So obviously going in, you have to talk about your one-time cost, whatever that's set up, and your reimbursement for that. And going forward, to the extent that you are responsible for any capital to the connection, you will have to build into that. So from a principle, that would be correct. Until we get into the balls of contract itself, I can't speak further than that.
Thank you. And my compliments to whoever got the treats this morning. All right. Any, Joe?
I brought that up and posed that question to Nestor. Could we bottle our own water and start to sell it across the world and actually reap revenue? Which I always believe sharing water is a bit of a human right. Making big money off it sometimes concerns me. But is there the ability for our water is tremendous. It's even way better than what it's filtered. I believe it's tremendous water, always was. And if there is excess for us, above and beyond what our overriding development needs might be, or even actually creating our development, how we develop in the future, is there the ability for a community to sell bulk water or promote bulk water sales through one of our partners or somebody in our area? And what is that? Is that built into our water laws that we could actually sell to producers?
I think we can do that in Ontario, can't we?
Yeah, they do do some of it
As a revenue stream.
as a revenue stream. And nothing would be better to market our pure water across the world with an enamel label on it, shipping some to Africa for free or wherever there's a drought in our world over the next decades, because I think we will have some reasonable water.
Is there a question in there?
How much
Would
money
you like
can
to
I
have-
make if I sell a watering
So, can we deal with this, then, the recommendation that we have on the table, and then if we want to come back to that and ask staff to entertain the investigation on whether it's possible? Makes good sense. What do you want to speak?
Well, I was going to say more or less the same thing as you are. I'm not saying that's not a bad idea. I'd love to have, if we have enough and if we're careful with it and all of that, but that's not what we're doing here. So let's just
park that.
look at the market, but don't forget about it.
Leave that one bottled up for a while.
All Canadian, I know, Taiwan was Whistler water. Seriously, that's the brand, Whistler water is a brand.
It's a company,
Yeah.
we work with the city to pull it out.
It's all the rage.
We can call it Nanaimo Water and get it bottled somewhere to somebody else's supply, and we just put our label on it too, and call it Nanaimo Water. So
SFN.
we'll never run out if you want to come to somebody else's. and
SFN
sell
with
it.
my revenue.
Anyway, if we could please just call the question, all in favor, motion carried. Just a reminder, all this is coming to us at California.
Yes.
So if we want to, this is all coming to us at council anyway, so if we want to beat it up there some more, we can. Next item, where am I?
Plan review.
Sorry, I apologize. Yes, thank you, sorry. So the next item is the 2017-21 review, and then the purpose is to inform the finance committee of key information. More detail to follow, and the presentation from Deborah.
Okay, so thought before we get into this, we would just do a quick review of what we've done so far.
Just sorry, 1 sec, sorry, Beth.
This presentation.
Just pause on for a second if that
Okay,
matters.
I can wait.
If we can hold off 1 second, Councillor Kipps said just a washroom.
We'll take a break. Well, since we're on a break, can we put power generators in our pipes? I wish Bill was here, because it's gravity fed, and it wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't take any electricity, and we can generate electricity. This is done in Portland.
So,
You know how much I love the Portland loo, so.
Is it a bomb pipe that you got
Jeez.
there?
No,
So you
it's
can get it
it's
into your
turbine.
lungs quicker and then, oh, I thought it was a bomb.
I know.
so Jerry, the comment to that is that, the municipality can do anything, you just have to authorize us the money to do it, and that's really what it comes down to. What's your level of service you want? If you want us to do X, Y, and Z, give us ABC. We can look into it, we can research it, we can do everything as the body of council tells us what they need to look at, but that's how we work.
Yeah,
So
I
if
just
the
thought
side
it'd
wants
be
to
great.
research, then the body asks us to research it.
It all the money. Our financial plan is the most important document that we ever have. Outside of, well, including official committee plans, strategic plans,
Yeah.
capital plans.
I just don't want it to flop like the
Money.
gas generator thing at the dump. 'Cause that was supposed to be some great project and that didn't produce.
The first question you need to ask is whether or not Hydro will let you sell it to them.
I don't want to sell it to Hydro, I just want to use it for itself.
So then how do you distribute it?
How do you do
Well, I
that?
just wanted it to power the plant. I don't think this is going to be enough to, just for the water plant. I just want to stick it in there and see if it works, see if we can generate electricity for the plant.
I actually believe that you could start out with 10.
Yeah.
Start out with 10. Next year, put 10 more in.
Yeah.
The year after that, put 10 more in.
Yeah.
And by the time you get to year 3 or 4, it's a potential that the first 10 you bought or paid for,
Yeah.
written this down. And it could be fairly lucrative because we've got a gravity fed water system.
Yeah, that's
One end,
exactly.
City the other.
Yeah, and this only works with
The
gravity.
question is how do you get will BC Hydro buy the power? For how much?
It's no different than wind generated
Yeah.
power all over the bloody world and all over the province now. and
Yeah.
We don't want to do it because it's unsightly.
Yeah, but this isn't unsightly though.
No, I know, but you
I get what,
you
yeah.
can do anything, Brad's right, you can do anything you want.
Just
We could put about 6 of those in Gabriel on
to
it.
my friends.
I mean, that's one of the reasons why Coastline didn't go ahead with their cogen, was because they had their cogen had made so much more power than they needed. BC Hydro wouldn't buy the power. And they couldn't put their own distribution in to get it to other people. It was, they were prevented from doing that.
Pretty good.
BC Hydro doesn't want to do that, they're going to sell their business.
Yeah.
Every community does that, and they're doing it. Yeah, that's good to go, as long as they're real.
Okay, so I just thought I'd start with a really quick recap of what we've done, because sometimes it gets a little confusing. So what we started with was the budget and brief document at the meeting in October, which was the high-level overview of the financial plan, all of it. And also we also provided you a project summary with that as well. Now, if you didn't bring them and you want to refer to them during today's review, I have extra copies. Okay, anybody else?
Thank you. It's just.
Well, I'll take one while you print one.
Okay.
Thank you, thank you.
I have one.
You do that?
Yes.
There you go.
It's been bursting.
There you go. Okay, so again, this was that high-level summary of the draft 2017-2021 financial plan. At the last Finance and Audit Committee meeting, we reviewed sewer and water funds only. And we're just talking about those user fee increases. And we looked at the operating and projects for sewer and water funds only. Today, we're going to do the general fund. So, if you do. So the general fund, of course, is everything except sewer and water. So it's all of the services we deliver: fire, police, parking and recreation, engineering and public works with roads and drainage, and as well as our general government. What we've handed out for you today is a project summary, facility project detail, all project detail, and reserves, and we'll get to that in the next section of the presentation. So first of all, we looked at this at the very first meeting, where we looked at our projected property tax increases in 2017, the 2.4, and then basically 1, 1, and 1, and in 2021, it goes to 0.5. That's where we finished paying off the NAT debt in 2020, which is about $500,000 a year, so that's the large reason, or the main reason for the drop in 2021. Okay, next. So the average 10-year property tax increases for the city of Nanaimo is 2.2%. Our 2017 revenues are projected to be $139 million, of which $100 million, or 72%, will be from property and property taxes. We have fees and charges, like our parks and recreation fees, our building inspections, all those types of fees. We have development cost charges that we collect from developers. We have traffic fines, casino and gas tax revenues, garbage fees. That's all the fees and revenues we collect. So, yes.
What's for the Nanaimo Center, 2%? What
That's
is?
the money we earn there. So this is only looking at revenues. So not net revenues. So we do earn, of course, money there from rentals. So 2017 operating expenses. So the annual operating and maintenance expenses for city, to deliver city services, and again, we're only looking at general, not sewer and water, is $120 million. And this is how it's pretty much distributed through the different services. We have a net increase of $2.2 million here. So about 24% is police, fire is 13%, engineering and public works, so that's where you get your roads and drainage, is 16%, parks and rec 18%, and again, we're only looking at expenditures here, not net expenditures and not revenues. Community development, which now includes culture and heritage, is 7%. General government is 15%, and that'll be the CAO's office, HR, finance, IT, those support departments. Port of Nanaimo Center, 5%, and again, we're only looking at the expenditure side of it. Economic development, 1%.
We have a breakdown of what the 2.2 million is.
Coming next.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay.
If I could,
Yes.
the Parks and Rec was actually higher than that. They've had some budget taken away from them for culture, is that not?
It's been reallocated to community development.
Right.
So there is a reallocation there. Yes, that's correct. So here is the key budget drivers for 2017. So here's where the breakdown for the 2.2. So we have an increased contribution to the asset management reserve of $964 million. This is our last year of that 1%, so we're now at about $4.7 million each year going into that asset management reserve, and money is coming out, and we'll talk about that later too. We have 2 new positions. We have the increase in the IAFF contract. We have made a provision for increases for PPM management. Our CMP contract has increased by $854,000. We decreased snow and ice control as we have had, we looked at past history and we have a reserve as well if we need it for a not good year. We also added new debt.
Flood control?
We also added new debt for the Wellcox Access project. Okay, so that came to $3.4 million. At the same time, we're projecting $1.2 million in new growth. So that helps reduce it to the 2.2.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so that's we have some high-level detail on the different departments in the general fund in that budget and brief document. Basically, except for the effects of reorganization, their services are the same. So we're going to focus on projects. Yes.
I know I was going to talk about this later, but in the overall, I want to talk about that 1% contribution to asset management reserves.
Yes.
Since we stopped in 2017, what are we doing for the rest? And can we divide 2017 to 0.5% and put 0.5% on 2018? So this was dropping down to 1.9, with 2018 up to 1.5.
So we've committed that we will provide you in Q1 of 2017 an update on asset management. And at that point, we'll also make recommendations as to what to do beyond 2017.
Yeah.
So I think let's have that conversation when we bring you the data of what the future is going to look like and what that percentage could look like going beyond 2017.
Because it's a year out for that to stop.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna look at projects. And there's levels of detail in projects. So the information we've provided you is high level at a summary, and if you go to the next one. And then there goes into different levels, and we'll get to that. The first thing I did want to talk to you about a little bit was funding. And again, that's always what is the flow of cash for the city? So here again, we're going to just repeat, we have property taxes, user fees, and DCC fees. We have those other revenues, and they flow into our annual operating and maintenance, or debt repayment. They flow into reserves, our savings accounts. They flow into projects. And at times, we have additional revenues coming from borrowing, grants, and private contributions. So that's the flow of cash. And now, projects. Okay, we comfortable doing the next one? Yes.
Can we just go back to other revenues?
Absolutely.
Where does leases and other, like say we have the bus bench advertising, does it go in there? As other revenues, we lease building space that we own or whatever. Does that go in other revenues?
I'd say likely it does, Councilor Westwood. I'd have to double check, but I think that's how we would have classified that, is it would go in here.
So then just, if it doesn't go there,
It would be user fees.
Where does it go?
User fees. So either we would have classified it as user fees, or it would be classified here. And likely what you're saying, it's always the same, it's one or the other. And likely what you're describing, we did classify here.
okay, thank you.
Another one here that goes here is the regional parks agreement with the RDN, it goes there.
Thank you. And then just a second question is, our DCC fees, we're doing a review on that, right? So obviously we only enter what we have, okay, but we are reviewing that. Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, just back up one more. So DCC fees go 100% into here, and then from here over here. And we'll look at that on the next slide, okay? Because it does vary how they're used, when they're used. Yeah.
Bill?
Sorry.
I always say there's 5 ways that the municipal government can raise revenues. It's taxes, user fees, DCCs, other governments can use money, and the disposition of assets. Because that goes in on a one-time year. If we sell a piece of property, it's how we have made revenue. So where does that show on that revenue cost? Because I like to see 5 separate things of how we can make money as a municipality. Just mine, like what I like at. Where is that built into there, where the sale of assets?
Just getting through the chair. So that's a really good question. We don't do it very often, but if it happens, it'd come in here, and again, it would go directly into a reserve. And then from that reserve be used for a project. Okay, it's one time it goes in here.
Because that's a fear of mine, is when the other things start to climb too rapidly and we start to look at divulging ourselves of our assets. School districts, for example, have been doing that quite rapidly here in the neighborhood. They're getting the old sites and downsizing, right? And I concern myself with the assets, although I always believe we can sell some parkland eventually. But, so that's a concern, so I would like to know where that is, where we're at.
So just one other quick thing. Spending, saving, spending. Okay? Now, next. So this is just
I'd
the
like to have
project.
savings, spending.
I know, we got to remember that. But we do spend our savings, so let's talk about that. So here's our projects. And we're focusing on general fund. So projects do vary year to year, for sure, as we have bigger and some major projects that increase. Majority of projects are funded from reserves. So again, we have those renewal reserves, like our IT reserve, our facility development reserve, our equipment replacement, and our asset management reserve. So that's the majority of these projects are funded from those reserves. Other reserves we have are the community works reserve, general capital reserve, we use those as well. We usually try to save those from our strategic projects. Every year, what we've been doing for the past few years, and we've talked about this before, and this plan also reflects it, is we have used approximately $7 million, 7.1, 7.2 from annual property taxes for projects. And we've tried to keep that steady to not put pressure on property taxes for projects. And because we have those asset renewal reserves, we've been able to do that. So that's important to understand. We also use borrowing. We use private contributions and grants for certain projects. So that's the flow of cash to projects. Yes.
And our borrowing is quite low as we've been.
And we've got some information on that as well.
And inside those, is there expirations on current borrowing? So when our
Yes,
debt
and
retires?
I've got that for
Okay,
you as
thank you.
well.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So funding strategy. There is a method to this madness, so let's talk about that. This is generally. So the first thing when I get all the projects from everybody and have them over the head, first thing I look at is funding from general revenues, that's 7.1 million. And the first thing I do is I fund non-capital projects. Because by our bylaws, in our statutory reserves, I must fund only capital projects from those reserves. So the first thing I'm going to do is fund non-capital projects from that 7.1 million. Many of them end up being facility projects because their projects tend to be smaller and they're below that capital threshold. So what we do is we classify, and just to quickly back up, we classify projects as either capital or operating. It's according to our policy. So of course it tends to be projects over 50 or 100,000 depending on the type of asset is capital. So smaller projects below 50 and often facility projects they are funded from this 7.1 million. We fund studies and condition assessment programs from this 7.1. We make the contribution to that housing legacy reserve, the 165 million each year from there.
165 million.
Oh, sorry, 165,000.
Well,
So,
it's just a few zeros.
once we've done that, and I've used up that money, then we're funding capital projects for property acquisition and road rehab. So all of that comes out of that 7.1 million. Property acquisition is that 600,000 annual budget we have. So it takes a good chunk of that 7.1. Road rehab is also another one that we've used, kind of traditionally used there. So that's used up. Then I'm going to go and look at the infrastructure renewal reserves. And for projects that are capital, again over that $50,000 threshold in most cases, I'm going to look at funding them from here. So that's IT, facility development, which is the Parks and Rec ones, right? That's where that 20% of Parks and Rec revenues go. Equipment replacement, which is fleet, and then the asset management ones. So I'm going to go and look there first. Next. And then I'll look at other reserves like general capital, community works, the sustainability and housing legacy, and I'll use those reserves where appropriate. So sustainability would be for any project that's for sustainability. It's to reduce energy consumption. Okay, get some things out. Okay, so project planning and reporting, and this is where I wanted to talk a little bit about the details of projects, and we have a lot of details. So it's always a challenge to think how best to present it to council. So what we've done this year is we have presented it to you in two different summaries. One summary is by master plans and initiatives, because often the question is, great, we approve all these master plans and initiatives, but how are we implementing them? So the first page on your project sheets, you will see the projects summarized or categorized by master plans or initiatives, and hopefully you find that helpful and interesting. Then we have provided a second summary, which we did last year, by infrastructure type. So then you can go and say, hey, what are we spending on roads? What are we spending on sewer? What are we spending on drainage? And within each of those, you can see what's renewal and what's a new upgrade. So that's at the summary level. The next level is by project, and council has often seen that. Those are those big reports because it'll show every project. And we've been a little bit reluctant about sharing that because, or publicly anyways, is because it gives information when we go to tender. So that's the next level of detail by project. The next level of detail below that would be project scope sheets, which are done for all facility projects, and the project scope sheets will capture the work to be done, the cost estimate, the source of the cost estimate, why it's being done. And then engineering services has a database they call CPMS, and all of their projects are tracked in that database. They have very detailed cost estimates, maps. Paul can speak to it far better than I can. Much detail there. So that's the layers of detail. So if you see something at the summary level and you want to go down and look at more detail, we can provide it, of course. Okay, excellent. So here's an overview of the 5-year plan or project plan that you see in front of you. The majority of R4 infrastructure renewal, new roofs, Bevan and NAC, these are significant ones. We're funding them from the AM, the Asset Management Reserve, and the Facility Development Reserve. They're over $1 billion. Road rehab, drainage mains, the Terminal Avenue South Utility Project, we're funding it from Asset Management Reserve. The Bastion Bridge, we're funding from the Asset Management Reserve. New programs for facility and drainage condition assessments. So part of developing our asset management capacity is learning more about the current condition of our assets and their remaining useful life. So we had some programs in place, probably more for water and sewer, but now what we're doing is putting new programs in place that'll give us that better information for planning. And then, of course, understanding our funding needs. So facility and drainage are 2 new programs in this 5-year plan. And of course, they're funded out of general revenue by another choice. The Port Theatre project, and we actually have a slide at the end, because I know at one of our meetings there was some, I didn't explain it very well. So I have a better slide to explain it, and I can do that at the end. Okay? And this one, the Port Theatre project, at this point in time, the total project is 12.6, with most of the money coming from grants and private contributions, and council's support for it will be through the 4.6 million borrowing. In this 5-year project plan, we have the Harewood Centennial Park multi-use facility for 2.6, funded from the Community Works Fund. We have the Nanaimo Yacht Club walkway funded from PILTS for 1.4. We have that Wellcock access, and this is kind of one of the few projects in the plan that are not that well developed yet, because we still have to make choices here. I can probably speak to that better. So we have the project in the 5-year plan for 6.3 with 6 million from borrowing. We have the design piece in 2017 funded from general revenues. Again, within that 7 million envelope. Strategic priority, the Georgia Avenue Greenway pedestrian cycling amenities, $4 million, funded from the Community Works Fund. Yes?
Thank you. The last bullet letter, I don't recall the Georgia Avenue pedestrian access bridge being $1 million.
It's 990, I rounded it, but it's $1 million.
It was always 990. My apologies.
Okay, so over the next 5 years, the plan is for $105 million investment in projects. So include capital projects and of course projects that are classified as operating. You can see the 2 biggest pieces are transportation and facility in the 2 different greens, the lighter and the darker. The darker being facilities, the lighter at the top being transportation projects. Subparks infrastructure projects, they do change. I made some notes on which ones were driving those changes. Here we have the Bastion Bridge. We have Wellcock's access being the driver here. We have the second part of the Port Theatre here. So that's what's causing those. Caution, we can still, always continually improving, to plan the best here. These tend to be not quite as well developed, and gotta work on that. Okay. Okay, so while these look smaller, likely as they come closer, they will grow, just as a caution. Okay, yes.
I still don't, and we've had this conversation before, I still don't understand why we put the Port Theater. I get that we put it as a placeholder, that should they raise 8 million, will provide them 4, or whatever that number was. I see it's 4.6 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So I don't understand why until such time as we, so it's just going to go from 17 to 18 to 19 every year? So if they don't do it in 17, we're just going to put it into 18. If they don't do it 18, we do. Well, it doesn't make sense to me that we put it in until such time. We know we've made the commitment that if you raise 8, we'll give you 4. Show us the 8. But I don't understand why we have to continually put that in the budget. Because it's not there doesn't mean that we aren't uncommitted. But it skews the numbers to something that, to me, it's a misrepresentation. I don't understand.
So, maybe two comments. The first one, internally for us, it doesn't make any difference. We can just keep the resolution that we are committed to it in the books and wait until they show up to say they're going to go forward. So we'll have that. But having been around a little bit, for political reasons, you want to show that, because the day it's not seen in the list, you are the ones who have to answer where it went. Because people read that differently, right? We can say, no, finance still has it in the books. No, I'm not seeing it on your list. And so we can do it either way, but there are consequences for not showing it.
We're going to show it over here. It's there in a placeholder. We haven't put it in because it skews the numbers.
Sure.
It doesn't, so, it doesn't make sense.
I agree with you. I think politically it's important. I mean, as long as we understand that 4.6 is there, what difference does it make whether it's there or not? I mean, it matters to the public, absolutely, for sure. We understand that we won't be parting with that money if we don't get what we asked for.
Yeah.
So to me, I understand that. When I'm looking at this, I don't really see why it wouldn't be there.
So I think what we will do through the chair is we would in a way communicate the commitment that it's there as a commitment, right? And from this kind of work, we'll probably bring it in to this once they show up at the door to say they're ready to go. But we need to communicate in a way that says that commitment still stands. It still stands as time passes, until you decide otherwise. If that helps.
It helps some, it doesn't help others, and
Okay.
I'm not going to get into an argument about it again.
This is the funding sources, again, for 5 years, showing about 35% coming from general revenues. That's at 7.1 million times 5. Statutory reserves being the bit, 47%, general reserves, debt, and then grants and private contributions. Let's talk about reserves. And I've handed out a reserve report. This is just for the general fund.
Can I ask a question to back on the last slide?
Yes.
Project funding sources. Where's taxation? So none of this is taxation?
Yep, sorry, and that's difficult because we call general revenue just taxation.
Okay.
So if you remember the slide where she was talking
Yeah.
about the flow of money from property tax into our savings, which is the reserves, which is what it's showing.
So where am I looking at it here?
Okay.
It's that one.
That one, yes.
Let me see.
Actually, I'll hold it.
That's the top one.
Okay, thank you.
So what we've done here is this is for the general fund only, and we've classified them in, again, to provide a bit of a framework and hopefully help with understanding, is the first section on contingency reserves. And you'll see these are usually allocations of prior year surplus, and we've put them in place for potential liabilities or risk. So the RCMP contract is one, we have uninsured claims, uncollected taxes. That just helps us be able to deal with issues if and when they come forward. The next section is for council initiatives, and you'll see that will be the housing legacy, the sustainability reserve, regional emission reduction, and the strategic partnership reserve. That was an allocation from last year's surplus. We then have an unallocated capital section. So that's on the bottom of page 2. Okay. These are the reserves that we often use for those more strategic projects. So important thing to understand here, we have that property acquisition reserve, and when we sell property, this is where that money goes to. And then, of course, we take money out of it at council's discretion. Our general capital reserve is always an allocation of the surplus, prior year surplus. So that surplus goes into this reserve when we have it, our annual operating surplus, and then we use it to fund fund projects. The community works reserve is one that we can actually kind of count on because we get money every year. So we get about $3.7 million each year for the community works fund. And again, we tend to use that for more strategic projects. We used it a lot for the water treatment plant. Casino, that's some historical allocation. We have other reserves here. The Knowles Estate Reserve, it can only be used for specific types of expenditures. Yes?
And where's Fortis?
Fortis is one of those other revenues. Okay, up in that funding, that's an other revenue. So Fortis actually helps us pay for those annual operating and maintenance expenses in the general fund.
So we can spend that money anywhere, Fortis money anywhere?
We already are. We already are spending it. So what
We
it
can
actually
spend it anywhere
happened,
we
so what
want.
happened is the first year we received it, which I think was the year before last. The first year we received it, what happened is it actually helped us keep our property tax increase for that year lower because it then funded annual operating, a portion of those increases.
So we can spend that money anywhere we want?
We already are. And we can spend it anywhere you want, that is correct. Yes, correct. That is correct. Yes. So the next section is infrastructure, yeah? Yes.
Through the chair, I thought the Fortis money was supposed to cover the costs of digging up and rehabilitating gas lines.
It goes in the pod.
Pardon me?
It goes in the pod. It goes into general, it's part of general revenues.
So in the past, when they dug up a road
Yeah,
and put a gas line in to service a home or service a neighborhood,
yeah.
we were paying for that 100%.
And I think those costs are going into operating, do you know? Probably they do, when they incur those costs. I believe they go into operating, which is part of what's funding that, where that money goes to.
But we used to bear that cost 100%. So until such time as we started to see some of that revenue that now covers some of those costs, we're probably
Yeah.
still
Yeah.
not getting the revenue compared to what it's actually costing us.
We'd have to track those costs.
In other words, it's not a new revenue stream.
Yeah, we would have to,
It's
yeah.
just covering costs that we've had to incur on our own for years.
Right.
With all due respect, I disagree that it's not a new revenue stream. We've never had it before. So now we have it. I think we're into year 2 or year 3 of it. Whatever was happening before us getting it, somebody had to pay for it, so I guess it was us. The money that we're getting isn't being allocated because we've been having to pay to have the digs take place. We're receiving these new monies to do whatever we want to do with it. If we want to say, well, that's to pay for the digging up the ditch or the trench or the whatever, call it whatever you want. But it's a new revenue we've never had before, and we can spend it anywhere we want.
Yep, and we do.
Mayor McKay.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
It's a reimbursement. It's like going into your, it's like the argument that was used over at the school board, that in order for them to provide certain bus services, they have to go into their reserves. Then the government gave them money back. And they then put that money back into their reserves. They provided the bus service. The challenge was, did the money go into the original amount of money that they used to provide the bus service? The government wasn't giving them. Same thing as this. Fortis was not reimbursing us for the costs of digging up roads and remediating them when gas lines went in. Now they are.
So I'd like to comment on that before I go to you. The reimbursement would be monies that we've already spent in doing all of this work over these years to dig up the roads. So we'd like you to reimburse all of that money to us, thank you very much, or a portion thereof, and let's negotiate that. This is new money.
So, through the chair, in his worship, I think you're all right in your views of what happened. So, yes, back in the day before this fund was in place, they would dig up and would be responsible 100% for restoring that infrastructure. Now, they are making this contribution in lieu of that. But that contribution doesn't come with strings attached, right? So, which is the point I think you're making, to say you can spend it any way you want. Nobody says you have to spend it on this piece, right? So if we go past that, the next question is, what's the best way to handle that revenue stream? I think that's the bigger conversation that I think we need to have. As it stands today, that revenue flows into general revenue. We're not attaching it to anything at this point. It's just flowing into the big pot of money. And indirectly, you would say it is offsetting the costs, but we're not tracking that, as she's saying. So that we can move on. At the next meeting, I'm going to come and talk to you about Fortis. I'm going to come and talk to you about the casino revenue. I'm going to come and talk to you about the Community Works Fund, because we need to do a quick shift and redirect some of this money towards strategic projects. Leverage that money towards strategic projects. And so that's the conversation that's coming in December. So we can address how best can we use somebody else's money for our benefit. That's probably the way I'm going to look at it.
Jim?
The pills, you include that in it.
Sure.
And that's kind of what this is too. Is there's some stuff caused by BC ferries, and they want to not pay us anything, so we shut off their water, and then we decide to pay us money back when. So we get that money and we put it into a general revenue to cover some of those costs. Can I ask one reserve? I'd say the North Slope Drainage Reserve. I'm always concerned about that area, that some of the developable, or lots aren't developable now. Does that tie into any of that? Paul might be the one that because there is some lots out there that we can't build on because of the soil makeup there, and it is a drainage problem because when the water gets into there, it liquefies, and those areas may fail in a earth seismic event. So is that what this drainage, or is that just the ground drainage on the road, the $1 million or so in that reserve? Is that what that's for?
It's a DCC reserve, so it would be for very specific projects in that area. And it's actually quite an old DCC reserve, back when we tried area-specific DCCs, which we don't want to do now. Okay, so it's kind of stuck there right now because we don't have any projects in that plan.
So could we rewrite that? Is that part of what we might be able to rewrite to flush out those old DCC projects that don't have enough money in them and steer them in a direction that meets our current strategic strategies? Is that? And do I look like a man with a plan?
Yes, you hit on it for sure. When we do the DC, we're going to bring forward the DCC review to council in early next year, and part of that will be looking at some reserves that we have that are kind of stuck. And what we want to do is take that money and put it into the citywide DCC reserves, and then have them support the citywide DCC program.
Based on
And there's a few of them.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, and then, did you have anything?
Oh, no,
Continue?
no.
Okay. So then there's the infrastructure renewal reserves, and we've talked about those a fair bit, that facility development, the equipment replacement, and the asset management. Those are the ones we use. If you look at them, you'll see withdrawals, of course. Let's look at them, they're on page 3. And the first one at the top of page 3 is the general fund asset management reserve. So you'll see there the opening balance is $5.3 million. In 2017, we're going to put in 4.7. We're going to take out 3.8 to fund projects, and we'll have a balance left of 6.2. So you see again, the next year we actually withdraw more than we put in, that's fine. We'll have a balance of 4.9, and then 7.3, 10, and 11. And again, as I cautioned you before, years 3 to 5, those projects tend to grow as they get closer to year 1 and 2. You'll see here about halfway down the equipment depreciation reserve. So this is the fleet reserve, and this is for city fleet as well as the fire fleet and then Zambonis. And you'll see it gets a little low there in year 5. It's a little bit of a challenge. We actually do 10-year plans for a lot of this. It's really a heads up. The facility development, yes.
Chair, are we going to be looking at that life cycle analysis on fleet? Because our core review people said you're keeping your equipment too long. So we're going to be we're doing a review on that. Okay. When do we expect to have a conversation about that?
We bring the timelines back to you, I think on the 28th, on the specifics of some of the cost service review. I can't remember off the top of my head when that's coming up.
Another one I just wanted to point out too is the general parking reserve. It's about 2/3 of the way down. So the general parking reserve, that's where we have all those parking revenues, and we have those annual costs for parking, and what's left over goes into the general parking reserve, and we use it to fund projects for parking. I just want to point out that some of those parking projects that you'll see in the more detailed information for parkades and that is funded from the asset management reserve. Okay, so parking does not cover all of the infrastructure development.
So just out of curiosity, what would these include?
The projects that are being funded from the parking reserve.
I'm just generally.
Yeah, absolutely. The meter replacement is usually a big one.
Okay.
But the bigger projects for the parkades where they're doing, they're $500,000, I had to fund those out of the asset management reserve.
All right, thank you.
The last section is development cost charges for reserves. And these are the reserves, again, where that money that we collect each year goes directly into those reserves or savings accounts. And we can only spend it on projects that are in the current DCC bylaw. And that's why we're doing that DCC review, and we'll be bringing forward the new projects, the new calculations for the DCC rates for a new bylaw. And that'll happen in early next year, in 2017. One thing you'll see here is that the DCC citywide drainage is fairly healthy, but we also know that we've got a lot more projects coming through in the next, in this current DCC review. And things like that North Slope, Millstone, those are the two ones that we want to combine into the citywide ones. Because they're old area specific. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so next. Would you mind? So again, this is the summary again showing the total. It shows a breakdown too by the DCC reserves, the infrastructure renewal, which of course is probably the biggest piece between those two. And then those other, the council initiative reserves, capital reserves, and how they change each year. And really what's driving this increase up here is those infrastructure renewal reserves as they get bigger in years 3 to 5. Until we go and do the next year plan. So the next slide. So reserves, just quick, we've already talked about this a little bit, but 2 reserves, that general capital reserve. So that's the dollars that come from annual surplus going into that reserve.
7.1.
Let's have a quick look and see what it is. Yeah, this.
Out of the 7.1 million.
No, it isn't. No, so it's our annual operating surplus. So you know every year we have an annual operating surplus and it will vary. What was last year's? What was last year's? Around 3 million? I'm going to say wrong number for sure. But it's usually somewhere between $3 and $6 million each year. And it's because, let's say, we've had our RCMP contract expenses are lower. Let's say our investment income is higher. Sometimes our building inspections or permits are higher than what we budgeted. So that's our annual operating surplus, and it varies year to year. The big chunk of that surplus usually goes into that capital reserve, and then we usually use that reserve for more very one-time strategic projects. Okay? Yes.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry.
I don't like how our surpluses are categorized into a lump. I would really like to see us put the surpluses back into categories where they came from. Because we overinflate in our CMP contract, so you're telling us it's going to go up $800,000 next year. But we could maybe have saved $1.5 million from last year's RCMP contract for whatever reason, for an example. So actually, you know, we should let the people know that they just constantly think we're increasing, but they don't understand that when we don't spend that money, it's not an, I just, yeah, and I don't like it when it gets lumped because nobody knows where this lump came from. Then we get hammered for fire or we get hammered for RCMP and saying it's so expensive. But you know, half that money, like was last year, was $1 million from RCMP, right? So I just don't like how it just gets lumped and it doesn't go back to the categories where it came from to justify. It just seems to make more sense in my world if I'm saving money somewhere. It goes back into that pot because I didn't spend it. And that's what I do with my bands and all my other stuff. It's like, well, I made some money here, I lost some money here, but it doesn't go into my reserves or anything else. It goes back into this specific fund that it came from. It just seems to make sense to me.
I think that's typically how the regional district functions. Yeah, sorry. Richard?
So when we bring the reserve report, we actually identify where the surpluses are coming from. I think for police, we have traditionally actually identified that surplus goes into a police RSMP contract reserve, so it goes back there. For everything else in general, this is where we take that and don't funnel it back to operations. We're taking it into that capital reserve, the majority of it. The reason being, within our year-end process, within departments, we identify ongoing projects where it's supposed to be done this year, it's going to be done next year. So we call those carry-forward projects. Yeah. So within our process, we do allow, to some extent, that departments, instead of us taking the whole amount, putting into one bucket, and then increasing taxes over here, we are allowed to say, well, for this project that you haven't finished this year, we'll carry forward this so we don't increase our taxes. So that process goes on underneath. Back in the day, when we were truly doing fund accounting, which is what RDNs, the districts, the regional districts now still do, is you would have a bucket for everything. It's easy to follow through with that in terms of conceptualizing how that works out. We have moved along a bit, but we still do fund accounting to some extent. And we will try, I think, in the next report to communicate better in terms of the buckets where this money is going back.
Yeah, because I think that was the big question is staffing, for prime example, is we lost a lot of staff. So we saved a lot of money over that time, and now to stick it into a capital reserve from the money we saved in staffing, you know, or I don't, if it goes back into staffing or whatever category.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
When we eliminate staffing, that reduces the pressure on property tax increases. It doesn't do any, it has nothing, it doesn't generate surpluses, and it doesn't go into a reserve. One other quick thing, I just want to bring up the RCMP contract, to just to understand why there is such a significant variance there year to year, is that the RCMP actually provides us with their budget. Okay, so we have the RCMP budget here.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, we've lost form.
Oh, wait.
Do we need a quorum when we're discussing, or do we need a quorum just when we're voting? Because we're done at 11:30. So do we, if we're not going to be voting, do we need to wait for a quorum if we're just having a presentation?
It's almost been my understanding you can't have a meeting without quorum.
So to be safe, I think we take a short break and get the other party back.
Okay, we'll be back at whatever.
Victor, I have a question. So, just listening at the other side. So is it, are you saying one of these specific, or is it generalized of this, for example?
I think if you sell water commercially, that means you have to allow it, if nobody's available to every company in the US and
Just looking at this one, it's like $100,000 for the facility or maintenance.
So there is like she's saying, so for each of these, you can actually
Yeah.
I did talk to them yesterday, they haven't been created.
Yeah, I'll let that it's something when we did the draft budget, they weren't finalized.
Yes,
So now we
yeah,
have to
exactly.
vote on the final.
Yeah. Exactly right. Well, that's what I mean. But yeah, and I'm just wondering, like, do these projects, do they need it to be done? Are they like complete repairs? You know, I don't see much of these. This like, a lot of it is like
If we don't finish today.
replacement.
Just up in
Yeah. Oh, I think we will finish today, but we're close to the end.
seriously.
Yeah, like I said, it's all these other ones.
Yeah.
Like, so you know, when you do upgrade lighting, it's that upgrading
thought
to
when you
upgrade just replacing it because.
Well, you should have had
Yeah, I have no problem with upgrading for efficiency and lighting and all the other stuff, but I'm just saying that if they want to be, just because they don't like the lights, they want to change it around and wires and so I like to see if all these ones that have like a business case that justifies the cost of like fixed energy savings, sustainability. Yeah, I'm completely all for that.
You dream about lights at night?
For me,
You dream about lights at night?
sustainable energy is what I dream about. And that's the only way that we're ever going to connect.
So what, to your question, we when you do find us
Yeah.
which have scope sheets for each one.
We have some
So we can actually say, okay, project is a scope sheet for every section.
Yeah. Yeah, because that makes a lot of sense on why it's getting done. And I just like to know all the reasons for all this. It's like security cameras. The police station, did you see the police station? What? You're telling me that you don't have a security system right now in 2019? You want $275?
Right now, there's not much happening there, so it makes no sense to take us over there. It's gotta be, they do have groundwork, the way how the wheels take off.
And
So it puts a stop to something.
So my question is the security system that we take out, why couldn't we use it? Because that's probably nothing. Why can't we put it into training because you're saying security system 2017 for $26?
controlling the use yard.
And I know that price range that is very obvious.
I just said that to me.
Because you got 1 year for the city system, aquatic center needed, minimum of the other ones. Yeah. Oh yeah, in another form, just for you to. I just like to know on why we guys are doing it, and I understand our he was
Yeah, no, they are attractive.
right, and for us, just to replace it, you know, 75, I don't know if they're going to value.
And to me, it doesn't make sense because we have two generations, which generates a year. That should override everything that goes on. But I think we should change the.
So worthwhile.
Yeah, this company Lucid Energy out of,
Oh, no, I think this is great.
yeah.
You know what, Gary, I don't use
No, I just don't know how to start. I just don't know anything about it, but I'd like to know something about it, and that's what I'm actually like. Yeah. So this is.
How long are we gonna go? We
So
have to
they're
be on
coming out
the
of
road.
equipment, so this
We'll
is-
be under that.
He said to me.
So it doesn't require.
We'll
When
be
you get there on
close.
time, you should be able to
Our
get
lease
it.
is just from gravity, which is.
Yeah, he said.
Ideal for us.
We have those reserved for
The scale of
We
this.
could have the energy recovery facility at the new #1 reservoir.
Yeah, so I like to know.
Generate power and sell it back to
Yeah.
DC Hydro.
But these ones here are.
Yeah, in the
put them in.
pipeline, yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Relative to the power to
Gravity. Yeah, out of the pressure, so you can actually have these good pressure as well. I don't know what pressure, that's what I'm saying, I don't know enough about the
You can get it for all
facility.
kinds of things. There was a really good,
Yeah.
But I just want to give you a sense of scale, like these guys generally get stuck on existing activity and we do that energy cut.
Yeah.
This is and we adjusted here.
So this, yeah, well, that's why this is this gravity fed, right, so it's more or less. Yeah, this is actually pretty cool, they actually have a test case of how much electricity they produce and the size, I don't know how big our pipe is.
Come on, have a chart.
Yeah.
All righty, under the B. This next game will be across on the card. Under the I. Under
Okay.
the N.
under the
We
graphics.
talk
Alright, Jeremy, we
really
have
fast.
19 minutes.
Okay.
RCMP.
Okay, super quick. This is the RCMP budget. They give it to us. We budget at 95% because we know there is going to be vacancies, right?
Yeah.
What happens is they actually go like this. And that's what causes the surplus every year, depending on how low their vacancies go. Would be good if they could get it up here, okay? Another very super quick thing. What happens when we're talking about that annual surplus that goes into the capital reserve, we talked about how money comes here and it goes here. This is when we have a surplus here, and we do every year, it goes over here into a reserve, and then it goes here, okay? So Adam, you can go to the slide we were at, please.
So, through the chair, so why can't we have, and I know we used to, when the Socrates had it, it was called the Budget Stabilization Fund.
Yeah.
Why can't we have budget stabilization in individual categories? So for example, if we have $1 million surplus in the RCMP budget for this year, why can't it go into a budget stabilization fund so it rolls back into RCMP so that we don't have, we can, because it goes into this pot now that we can go out and do projects that we don't have to ask for, community assent.
So you do have the budget stabilization fund, at least for the police. Because we take that $1 million and put it in the RCMP reserve. If you remember, I think last year sometime, they came in, they asked for 2 additional FTEs. Instead of increasing our taxes, we went to that reserve. So we are back at that point again where I'm beginning to say, so is the 95% the right spot? Maybe lower than that. So we'll get to that point. But you do have that stabilization process as you have it set up now. What you don't have, which is a longer conversation for some time in 2017, is the general operating stabilization side of things. So we need to rearrange a few things a bit and set what I call the floor numbers, right? To say you should always keep this much of money for your operating in case somehow you lose a section of Nanaimo through fire or something. I'm thinking of what happened up north. So what do you do with that, right? So, but in general, I think we have a good setup that absorbs these ups and downs as we have it now. But I think we will need to clean it up at some point. And Deborah had started working on the reserve policy sometime last year, and then we waited to hear what cost service review would say. And so that's part of the work plan.
Supplemental, like 600,000 a year for snow removal. So we've got 600. Then I don't believe it should go off into reserves and then end up building a building.
No.
As far as I'm concerned, it should go back into a budget stabilization and be rolled over into the next year. Surpluses from that for this year, if we have no snow, should roll over and fund next year.
Which is what we did this time.
Right.
We've started to do that on the snow.
And also last year, we did use 200,000 of the previous year's surplus for
Right.
next year, and we're doing it again every year. Okay, at this point, 200,000. Super quick. Deb, next slide, please. So again, looking at just general fund, again, we're showing that new borrowing for Port Theatre and the Wellcox access when we figure out what we're doing there. Our debt servicing limit is 34 million. That means our annual payments cannot exceed 34 million. Our current annual debt servicing is 4.7 million, or about 14% of our current limit, and that includes the water treatment plant. Next.
Just a quick question,
Yeah.
sorry. Port Theatre is 4.6, but on your slide you have 6.9.
No, sorry. 6, you don't even get to the last slide. Jerry knows.
Or not your slide,
Councillor
not your
Ryan
slide,
knows.
I mean on your general
Because
fund.
in the draft plan, that piece is budgeted, because we have the difference between that and the 12 point, the total budgeted this year. It's confusing, and hopefully my last slide will help explain it.
Sorry, so this is where it does concern me. 309,000 debt servicing. For what?
Go back, sorry, where did you see 309?
It's just right there, top point.
Oh, there's 309, so that would be the annual payments for that loan. That is correct. That is correct.
At this point, it's doing nothing.
So does the $309,000 go in a surplus?
No, it's budgeted in operating.
So it does reflect our budget,
It does impact the budget, that is correct.
right?
That
So,
is correct.
but we haven't taken out a $4.6 million loan.
So, okay,
So
so
why?
the money comes in, but we have to pay it back.
When we take the loan out for the Port Theatre,
So we take the loan out, we go pay all the bills to construct it, and then we have to pay that debt back. And then we use that debt over 20 years.
starting in year one that we take the loan out.
That's correct.
We haven't taken the loan out.
No, that's the existing, isn't it?
No, that's a new borrowing.
That's the
That's why I'm confused too.
So it doesn't make, like, I'm sorry, but it.
So where doesn't it make sense?
Okay.
Well, I don't know, if people are gonna go.
Let's explain that at the end. I think I get where your frustration is.
Okay, perfect. Next slide, Adam. So here's a summary of our current debt. Okay, we borrowed this money here, and here's our annual payments, and that's the year the borrowing will be repaid. And that's where you see for NAC, it's repaid in 2020, and we talked about how that property tax increase in 2021 actually was less because of that. This again is just a summary of the new debt and what that would look like. And these impact operating budgets, the operating budget in the year they're borrowed. And then of course the year that they're repaid, the next year, the operating budget goes down. Think of it like the debt has its own operating budget. So next slide. So just a very quick projects that are not in the plan. And this kind of speaks a little bit to like Port Theatre and even Wellcox, where we haven't really developed the cost estimates yet, some cases business cases or studies. So these are projects that I just want to make sure you know aren't in the plan that are being worked on. So we have the events complex, we have waterfront development, we have a public works building. Next one.
Wait a second,
Sure.
back up on something. In 2009, we turned down a public works building for 12 million. So we've saved some money.
You know, that is
We
not.
saved 4 million.
Oh, I know. I shouldn't have even put that number there.
Perfect.
Shouldn't even put it there.
Working
Okay.
out of them sheds out there.
Police operations building expansion, fire station #1 renewal, replacement. So we have a condition space needs assessment ongoing right now, and then to come back to council and Craig, the chief can always speak to that. Bevan Park Complex power distribution replacement, and Mark can speak to that, I think, if needed. Harewood Centennial, the youth park phase of that development, not in the plan yet. Next slide. Middle Colliery Dam, street light conversion to LED, and some IT projects. These are things that are being talked about, and some work is being done on them, but they are not in the current plan, and of course they are not funded. So next slide, please. Next slide, and this is it, Port Theatre. So hopefully this makes some sense. So in the current 5-year plan, we budgeted over 2 years, 2016 and 17, this 12.6 million. In the current 5-year plan, we said it was going to be fully funded from grants and private contributions. Now, in the draft plan, this 2017-2021 plan, the project of course hasn't started yet. We still have a budget of 12.6, and what we're going to be doing is we'll be carrying forward the 5.7 in 2016 to 2017, right? And that comes at year end. We do those carry forwards, and council gets a report on that. But we still have to budget for that second piece, 6.9. So what we're doing here is we're going to push it out a year. And then private contributions, combination borrowing, private contributions here. So hopefully that's clear. No,
Okay.
maybe not.
All right. Okay. So let's finish the meeting. So I'm going to explain this one. So if there are questions, because I see that she may come to, we may be losing one person. If there are general questions, then we'll come back to you.
Do you have more?
Nope, this
That's
is
it.
it.
That's it.
That's it.
So before you leave,
Yes.
just 2 seconds through the chair. So
Yeah, but
this is probably the last planned big discussion. We're going to do one more cow presentation because members of the public who can't make the morning have asked to say would like to hear more about the budget. So we thought we'd do a cow presentation early December. In December we'll come with the provisional budget bylaw for your approval. So what I'm going to do between now is try and engage you formally and informally to see where you are on approving the provisional budget in December. So feel free to shoot an email. You have a question on a particular project. You have some thoughts about the property tax rates that are being proposed. Let's have that conversation between now and then. I'm hoping that one of these Mondays we can also just have a feel of where you are, because in December we would like to do what we did last year, do the provisional piece, and then provide shoot for everybody going forward. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn.
The motion moved by the council, we need to rise and report.